welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelly Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Today, in honor of our 65th episode, we'll be combing through some previous episodes to bring you specific tips from 5 New York Times bestselling authors on how they found their way to publishing their first books. First up, New York Times bestselling author of adult and young adult fiction, Emiko Jean. Her YA novel, Tokyo Ever After, was a Reese Witherspoon Hello Sunshine book club pick, and her adult novel, Mika in Real Life, was featured on Good Morning America as a GMA book club pick. She was recently on the podcast to discuss her debut adult thriller, now also a bestseller, The Return of Ellie Black, and she shared how she came to writing later in life.
I've always liked writing, and I remember doing well in school with writing. You know, when you had to take the state tests, there was that writing portion. I remember my mom being like, you scored pretty well on this, and that kind of being like a question, like, but I didn't come to it until later in life. I was a pretty voracious reader, like I think most writers are, a lot of people are. And I loved reading from a really young age, but I never read anything by a Japanese American author, and I never read anything with a Japanese featuring a Japanese American character. And so I believe that was kind of subconsciously turned off for me. So while I love to read, I didn't feel like I could pursue a career in publishing because there was no representation there. And so at a very young age, I'd been kind of erased from the thing that I loved the most. And even when I published my first book, I published it with a white character because I didn't think someone like me that looked like me would be published. So after that, I was much more intentional because once I had kind of had a footing and believed in myself a little bit more and trusted the publishing world a little bit more, I cast Japanese or Japanese American characters into my novels. So it took a long time to come to writing. I tried a lot of different jobs. I skipped around a lot because I hadn't found my thing yet. And I remember I was working a job that I was deeply unhappy at. And I would be in the office and I would open up my email and I would pretend to be typing an email, but I was really writing chapters into a book. So it really started as, I think, a way to kind of escape from that. And so eventually that became a novel, a really terrible novel that never was published. But that's kind of when I got the taste for it and when I decided that I wanted to be intentional with writing and really try to make a career out of it. And I did, I was foolish and bold, but I was like, I remember I quit my job and I announced it, which I like, you should.
That's great.
I announced it and I was like, I quit my job because I'm going to write a book. And and everybody was very worried, and they should have been because it took a couple more years after that, but enough, and the rest is kind of history.
Well, what was the road to publication like for you? So you quit your job and you got started and you've got those 2 years when you're writing. And then how did you actually get the first one published?
So to correct that, I wrote a novel, and while I was working, and I got an agent. And so I quit after I got the agent because I thought that I had like made it
Oh,
after
well,
I got an agent.
that's solid though. Yeah.
So, to be fair, I was still working full time and writing in the evening. So that was kind of, um, you know, it was difficult. I was working full time. So, and then I would come home, I'd eat dinner, and then I would write for 3 to 4 hours a night.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
And, and that was hard, but it's not as hard as it has been having now that I have kids and I'm trying to write, which is a different whole different, animal in itself. But um yeah, so after I submitted that novel that I had been working on at night, and I got an agent, and I thought that we were going to submit it, but she's the same agent I have now, a very editorial agent. And so she sent me a very long editorial letter. The like I think it was 12 or 20 pages. I should look it up someday again. And I didn't know that I didn't really even know about like revision, that writers revise their books. I had a very romantic idea about what it meant to be a writer. And, I had the vision of like the movie vision where you go to a cafe and you write and you struggle for a minute, but it's mostly with your ideas. And then you turn it in and it gets published. But um, I wasn't ready for the hard work. And also, I wasn't ready, I don't think, to feel kind of so stripped down. I mean, once you receive that first editorial letter, you essentially feel like very naked. And I heard one writer say it's like being naked on like a doctor's examination table, and they're gonna like look at every mole and tell you what's wrong with you.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, that's how it feels. Um, and so it took me a while to kind of to read through that editorial letter line by line. And we revised the novel for about 2 years before we submitted it. And I remember feeling really frustrated at times. And then once we submitted it, the reads went pretty fast. I think it was only out on submission for a couple weeks, and it went to auction, which was
Oh,
great.
wow.
So it was really exciting, but it was really, um, I'm not sure how to describe it now, but you kind of think that I thought that I had like really made it once you got a publishing deal and stuff, but it's really, you just go back and you kind of do the same thing over and over again. You write a book, you get another letter, and it's kind of rinse, wash, and repeat. But I remember being very excited, but I also, now looking back, remember being very, not age young, but just young in the sense of the publishing process.
Fiona Davis, New York Times bestselling author of historical fiction novels set in iconic New York buildings, including the GMA book club pick The Lions of Fifth Avenue, says she also came to writing later in life. She shared the story when she stopped in to discuss her latest New York Times bestseller, The Stolen Queen.
Now, I came to New York as an actress and worked for about 10 years, and then ended up going to Columbia Journalism School. And that's where I really started to learn how to write and how to structure a story. But I never imagined writing fiction. I loved reading it, but I couldn't imagine it until I was in my mid 40s. And I just stumbled upon a story that I thought would make a great book. And that eventually became my first book. So it was a weird, winding passage, but I always say you should change career every 10 years because you
I love
eventually
that.
land where you want to be, and it's kind of a compilation of everything I've done. And it's so much fun. I love it.
What was the road to publication like for you?
Yeah, I was lucky. I started going to writers' conferences and panels and that kind of thing to learn about the fiction world because it's very different from nonfiction. And I remember hearing a panel of some agents, and one of the agents said she was looking for strong female characters. So when I felt like my manuscript was ready, I sent it out to about 6 agents. And she reached out to me and said, yeah, I like this book and let's do this. But the book needed a lot of work. I didn't know what I didn't know. So we went to a freelance editor. We went through multiple revisions, which took about a year. And only then was it ready to go out to submission. And we luckily landed with Dutton, which is a wonderful publishing house, and been there ever since. So it was much easier than I think a lot of people's.
Mhm.
Um, and that's just luck, I think. It's just, I think when I submitted it, being able to say, I heard you speak, here's what you said, here's what I've written, was enough to get me out of that slush pile.
Julia Bartz's debut thriller, The Writing Retreat, was an instant New York Times bestseller. But she says the road to publication was actually a long and difficult one.
It's funny. I was listening to your episode with Isa Adney, and she
Mhm.
was talking about she had kind of a dark night of the soul after she didn't get into the doctoral program. And I definitely went through something like that myself in terms of, from a very young age, knowing that I wanted to be a writer, writing stories and books as far back as I can remember. That was kind of my identity. That was my thing. And, I thought a part of that would be getting published. And I expected that to happen, at different points. And it wasn't happening and it wasn't happening. And I think there's this idea in society, I think it's the whole capitalistic bootstraps, like, oh, well, if you put enough effort into it, you'll get it, right?
Mhm.
Just keep going and like do whatever you need to do and work at a coffee shop or whatever, which is great. I've definitely worked at coffee shops before. But I don't think that we're always aware of the obstacles and how long it can take. It can take decades sometimes. So after my second book, I had gotten an agent for that book and we'd revised a lot together. And then things kind of fell apart. And I've heard that that's actually not uncommon. And I've talked to other people who have gone through that too.
Mhm.
But it was, it was really disappointing. And so that was the point where I really had my dark night of the soul and was saying, thinking to myself, like, I can't keep doing this. Like, it's just this constant feeling of failure, rejection, and shame too. Like, I felt personal shame about it.
Mhm.
Even though, again, I think this is a really common situation. And so I think at that point, and again, I was going into the therapy world, which I find um, incredible. I really love it and find it really interesting and exciting. Um, and with the writing, there's only so much control you have over the publication process.
Mhm.
So I started to shift at that point into, well, how, this, my creativity has become this thing that it's almost like I'm fighting against it. Like I feel like I'm pushing myself to keep going because I just want this end goal to happen. And yeah, it was very depleting, led to burnout, led to depression. And incidentally, that's when I started therapy myself and was like, oh, I love therapy. I want to do this for other people too. Um, but nowadays it's interesting because I do creative coaching. And so I work with artists and a lot of writers. And I think the most important thing is trying to figure out like how can your creative life be something that um, feels um, like pleasure and joy and something that you look forward to and something that you want to do and not something that's just like on your list or you're like pushing yourself to do it because you feel like you have to get to this point. And that's something that I was really trying to show in the writing retreat too. um, Alex goes through that same process where she feels like I haven't gotten this thing that I wanted, other people seem like they're ahead of me. She starts to sacrifice certain things to get what she thinks that she wants. And at
Mhm.
the end of the book she realizes, you know what, like if I write then I'm a writer and that's it. And
Mhm.
so that's something that I think we can all maybe, you know, internalize that a little bit more and just figure out like, you know, I had put so much pressure on just my writing and kind of neglected these other areas of my life as well. So
Mhm.
thinking about like, how can I have a full life which includes this thing that I love, this creative work. But it doesn't feel like everything's riding on it.
Yeah. And it's so great to sort of hear that backstory too, and everything behind it, and sort of make this distinction, because, I think we hear debut novel, instant New York Times bestseller, and it just sort of sounds like, oh wow, everything just worked out, right away for her. And that is not the case. I would assume that's probably not usually ever the case for anybody. There's lots and lots and lots of slog and hard work that's going on, and rejection behind the scenes before that
Yeah.
that big day comes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've had people reach out to me and say, like, I'm in this decade of my life. I think it's too late for me. And I'm always just like, no, like, if this is something you enjoy, like, just focus on it. And people get published at all different stages of their lives. I do think that if you keep going and you keep refining your craft and you keep putting yourself out there, I think something will eventually happen. But again, it can take longer than people think.
Yeah. Yeah. So when it did happen for you, when this one did come out into the world, what was that like? How did that happen? How did the actual publication go for you?
Yeah, so the writing, again, I wrote the very initial draft 10 years before, so it's, stopping and starting. It took some time. I think writing the version that's out happened a little more quickly within the last couple of years. I sent it to some writer friends, beta readers, to read it and give me their feedback. So I was editing and changing. And then I started reaching out to agents. So, I'm sure you've talked about that on your podcast. I'm happy to talk more about it.
Yeah, go for it. It's always nice to hear everyone's experience.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so it's such an interesting process. You basically just reach out to agents who you feel like might be a good fit for your book and who might be interested in it. One way to do that is to look at similar books to the one that you're writing, to see who the agents of the authors for those books are. And then it's a very specific email or letter that you send to those agents, typically email these days. And I think agentquery.com is always the one that I recommend, because it has examples. It shows you how to break up the letter into different parts. And the hardest part is encapsulating your book in like one paragraph. Like that is so hard to do. And doing it in a way that is really intriguing for people. So yeah, so that's, working on the query letter. I had friends, writer friends, edit that, and send me their thoughts on that. This is like your one chance. So you really want this query letter to be just like super solid and as good as possible. And then you start reaching out to people. And I also recommend not reaching out to everyone at one time, like maybe start with 5 or 10 people and see what kind of responses you get. Because again, you only have one chance to reach out to an agent. So you might get feedback, or you might, agents might be interested in it. They might ask to see the manuscript. They may give you feedback at that point. So you might want to be editing your book then before sending it out to more people. So this time, I got lucky. I had a couple of agents who were interested, and I went with Alexandra Machinist, who's incredible. And at that point, she and I worked on edits for a bit, and then she sent the book out to editors. And so there was a couple editors who were interested. We went with Emily Bessler, who she's amazing. She was editor for the book You, amongst many others. And she just seemed like the best fit. She was totally on board with all the craziness. Not everyone was like okay with it, but she was just like, like, yeah, we're going to keep it all. We're going to do it. And so I loved her enthusiasm. And so she became my editor. She and I worked together to edit the book. And then we went through the publishing process.
Marissa Stapley is the New York Times bestselling author of the Reese's Book Club pick Lucky, which has been optioned for television, as well as international bestsellers The Last Resort, Things to Do When It's Raining, and Mating for Life. She shared her road to publication when she came on the podcast to discuss her latest hit, The Lightning Bottles. Have you always been a writer? How did you come to writing?
I always have been a writer. I kind of envy people who were like, I was a lawyer and then we're a doctor. I know an ER doctor who's now. That's really cool. I had a point at between my second and third novel where I wasn't sure I could go on without a day job. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do? I have a journalism degree. I kind of exhausted all those, I worked as the magazine editor. I freelanced. It's not easy being a journalist. I was raised by a small town newspaper man and like mentored by his mentor, and everyone in my family, I have writers in the family, and they were like, you're the writer, you have the writing gene, which really kind of made me pursue something that there was no backup plan. So I have always been a writer. So thank God I can do this, because I applied to grad school. I was going to become a librarian, and now I don't have to do that. I could not think of anything else. The barista thing is probably not that far off. So yes, I've always been a writer.
What was the road to publication like for you?
Yeah, it was complicated. So I was a writer. I was a newspaper, magazine journalist, editor. I had done a lot of freelancing for years. And I knew I wanted to write a book, and I finally did. I think I had just had my daughter. My kids were really close together, and probably I was around 30, and I was like, oh, I haven't done that. I haven't written my book yet. So I wrote a novel. It was so great. It was called Saving the World in Sensible Shoes. It was an environmental rom-com. People were not ready for that.
I was going to say, it sounds great.
I know. I think now would be the time, but it did get picked up by a Canadian publisher called Key Porter, and it did the rounds everywhere else. And people were like, "No, this is depressing. We don't really want to talk about like the environment and climate change," and which tells you that this is why we are where we are now. But that company unfortunately went out of business. So it was such a huge devastation for me. I had an agent, I had a publisher, it all just kind of crumbled around me. I ended up switching agents to be with the agent I'm with now, Sam Haywood. So we've been together for 10 years. Wrote another novel out of sheer desperation, which, surprise, surprise, no one wanted, because it was just coming from like a bad place. Then I wrote Mating for Life, my first published novel, which started out as short stories. It was just me being a writer. I was working as a magazine editor, but I had to write. So I was doing them for fun. And I showed them to my agent and thought she was going to fire me. And she was like, this is a book. Like, you're writing a book. These are not short stories. Get these women together. And so I made them sisters. And so the rest is sort of history. But of course, this industry is a roller coaster. So that's, Mating for Life, and then I had 2 other novels before Lucky, which was the Reese's Pick, which was the big breakout for me.
Lisa Barr is the New York Times bestselling author of Woman on Fire, The Unbreakables, and the award-winning historical thriller Fugitive Colors. When she came on the podcast to discuss her latest bestselling historical thriller, The Goddess of Warsaw, she shared that her own writing aspirations started in the 2nd grade.
If you look at my 2nd grade essay, it said, I want to write books. Like, I knew from a young age. I mean, I went the journalism route first, but while I was a working journalist, I would work on my fiction at night. And so I was working both ends simultaneously.
And then what was the road to publication like for you?
It was not an overnight sensation. I mean, obviously for everyone, it's hard. You have to get the agent first, and it took a while to get the agent. And I had a couple different agents, 2 different publishing houses, and until all the pieces came together. And so, I always say, never take no for an answer. A door closes, a window opens. as writers, we face a ton of rejections. I remember interviewing Scott Turow in my role as a journalist, and he said that he literally wallpapered his wall with rejections from his first book. And so it's a long road. As I said, you have to be prepared for all the rejections that come your way. And you learn a lot of things as you go on. You learn, the one thing I always tell new writers, never tell someone, oh, it really gets good at page 20. In this book world, it has to hook the reader. First line, first paragraph. Every word counts, because especially when you're trying to get an agent or a pub house, people only give you, it's an instant gratification. If it's not good in the first 5 pages, or if it doesn't hook the reader, then do it again. Do it again. Absolutely rework it. So you learn things along the way. And I'm glad that my success came a little bit later, after the humps and bumps, because when things come too easy, you don't appreciate it. And I truly appreciate my publishing house, my agent, all those who are on my team now. I know what it takes to get there.
What do you know now that you wish you had known before publishing your first one?
I think the one thing you really learn is that it's so important to get a book tribe together. Writing can be the loneliest business in the world. I mean, I spend all of my time with my book. I work from a cafe because I like to have that noise circulating me. And you know what? I know a lot of writers need total silence, but I need the buzz around me to write. I wish I had known earlier on to create a writing tribe. That came a little bit later. But if I were to do it again, I would say from day one, find newbie authors, find those that you can discuss things with, to discuss rejections or publishing houses or things that happen, so you don't go it alone. So I think that would be something really important.
How did you find your tribe?
It began to build once my first book came out and various authors reached out to me, and I would say, hey, you're going through this, so am I. And then it started to develop. And you also learn that it's very important to say you have a favorite author, or you're writing suspense, follow suspense authors. Writing historical thrillers, follow historical thriller authors. Tell them I'm out there, and put yourself out there and get noticed. And then it starts to build. It's like that old hair commercial, and so on and so on. It doesn't just, snap come to be. You have to nurture those relationships so that they're real, and that when you need those other writers, they'll be there just as you are going to be there for them. So writing can be, right now, I have maybe 4 writer friends who are historical fiction writers who are coming out with their new book really around the same time I am. So you have a choice. You could say, just promote yourself, or you could say, I'm going to promote them. They're going to promote me. Sisters, we are in this together, and so I choose that route. It's so important to promote other authors of your same genre and, of other genres. But really, we're all in this together, and there's room on the shelf for all of us.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.